Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. I'd be here, quite an honor. So, I looked at the talk and I was like, capturing sunflower opportunities now and in the future. I'm not sure if I'm any better at guessing the future than anybody else, but as I started thinking about, there's a difficult years, and really I think the focus right now is cost-efficient production of pigs per sow per year. And as I think about that, what we're talking about is efficient use of resources, limited waste of feed, water, energy, and even labor, and even keeping diseases out in order to utilize those resources in these animals, and capturing sow longevity and a balance of replacement rates in those animals. So the question is, how to do all those sorts of things as well. And as we all really interesting in our in the world, the diversity in breeding herds and how they operate worldwide. Just examples of some different systems of anything from high rises to in Europe where you see bedded sow farms. So we got different farms and sizes, different seasons, global environments, and all these fertility challenges have to happen in each one of them. And I pull this up mostly not to identify where people are, but I look at some of the sow records, what is possible. And this kind of data shows us that in some of the top performing farms, wean to service intervals can actually average between 4 and 6 days. Farrowing rates can rotate around 90%, actually an amazing number. And total born here in the U.S. can range between, average for farms can average between 15 and 16. So some really amazing numbers, and I think gives us something to shoot for, especially when we can do it very efficiently. But a critical driver of all of this really is follicular development. Follicular development is actually one of the most important aspects for driving reproductive fertility. And this cartoon basically shows that most of the follicular development from wean sows or even from replacement gilts for puberty, all of this really occurs over a short period of time of 4 to 6 days. So these follicles actually move from small or medium size to large and ovulatory size in a really quick period. And the follicles themselves are secreting estrogen into circulation. And when all of that occurs properly, we can wind up with a strong estrus expression in those females. But also, the number of follicles that are developing to ovulate in this 4 to 6 day period actually sets litter size, the upper limit for litter size. So if 20 follicles are ovulating eggs, then the upper limit for litter size is actually 20. So these are important processes for how do we start the whole process for breeding a female. We get mixed messages, and I would say probably over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of interest in where does the origin from these follicles occur. Does it occur just at this 4 to 5, 6 day period or start, or does it occur weeks or even months ahead? And I think the jury is out on that. We don't really quite know, but there is some data to suggest it may not be occurring very far ahead, or we're not very good at detecting it. And so a couple studies here I'm showing you. The first one really is saying small size in mid-lactation in parity 1 sows had no impact on follicle size at weaning, nor on any fertility measure after weaning. And the reproduction fertility in this group was actually very good. But other studies from Spain around the same time showed that early size follicle size in the first week of lactation affected sizes all the way through. And so those animals that started with a small follicle size in week 1, by week 3, that group still had small follicle size. And interestingly, what they reported is animals that had small follicles, some population, they had a longer wean to estrus interval, and those animals were also associated with lower total born. Another study also looked at just infertile animals, so tracking these animals all the way through a 3 to 4 week lactation. And what was interesting is we wound up having animals that had ovarian cysts, so essentially infertile, and animals that never did show estrus. And what you're looking at here is across these weeks, you're looking at the cystic animals. They were different right from the start. They had different follicle sizes within the first week. And those animals that did not show estrus also had different follicle sizes early, right after farrowing. And I found that very interesting. That suggests at least something that was going on even 3 weeks before, in like 2 of these studies, was a role, at least played a role in some aspect of fertility. So I think we'll have to keep looking at that. But I would probably say that the first study shows that management can actually probably eliminate some of that. So maybe there's some management issues here that were causing problems. But the majority of the studies out there in wean sows really show that there's really no difference in follicle sizes pre-weaning, at least in this 1 week study. And what you're seeing here is after weaning, you're seeing 4 different patterns. Animals that develop follicles very quickly, 4-day estrus. Animals that were delayed a little bit, 5-day estrus. And animals that were delayed a little bit even more, 6-day estrus. And those that did not develop never did show estrus within this period of time. So at least nothing that we can quite tell. Maybe follicle size is too simplistic of an answer. There's something else going on. Maybe it's hormonal. But 4 days after weaning, follicle sizes that measure, on average, the largest ones that measure less than 6.5 millimeters. I know that sounds very specific, but trying to capture data versus those that are greater than 6.5 has a huge impact on fertility, in that almost a 20% difference in estrus expression within a 7-day period of time. Sows that will ovulate within the next 48 hours after this measurement, and even sows farrowing after they are bred. So something going on about follicle size, development, oocyte maturity that drives fertility. But farms can't determine follicle size, or not easily anyway. And so estrus is the best indicator of what's going on. And so animals that express estrus have a really high fertility rate. So anything that impacts estrus would be positive. And one of the things that I see is there's a lot of variation in when farms are starting boar exposure after weaning. You can imagine every single day. Some are starting day of weaning, day after weaning, all the way out to not starting until like day 5. And it's really no great day in there. But there is data that suggests that people that start, or farms that start boar exposure early, like within a day after weaning, you can pull the weaned estrus up, an interval up, and you can prevent some of those late sows from being after day 7. In estrus detection in stalls, really important, because oftentimes farms have a lot of sows to check, and so how much time is the boar actually in front of any of these sows? If you use a timer, you'll probably find out not very much. But if you think about the boar being in front of a sow from head to tail, provided that they're not moving too quickly, it should be at least 60 seconds from head to tail. And when are the people actually applying the back pressure test? If there's no 60-minute or 60-second exposure before the back pressure test is applied and they just simply move on, there's really not much stimulation or exposure going on. So I think there has to be some level of allowing the sow some contact before that's applied would be helpful. And in pens, I know this will always be a challenge because it's hard to know who was exposed and who isn't when they have freedom to move. So a real opportunity for technicians to make sure that they're in the pen long enough. And then this does get challenging as the pens get larger and larger. With artificial insemination, not much really has gone on recently. AI is still essentially performed on each day that the females are standing, with the majority of sows being inseminated 2 times, some 3 times. That's using pooled semen for the majority of the breeding farms out there. And conventional AI, best estimates right now are still about 60% of farms are operating with conventional AI, using around 2.5 to 3 billion sperm and about 80 mils of extender. But with PCAI, about 40% of market right now is in the intrauterine catheters. And some farms, of course, are 100%, and others do not use it at all. But in this particular system, bores are moved in for detecting estrus, and then they're removed for some period of time. And that allows the cervix to relax a little bit. The outer catheter is inserted, and then again, you have to wait a little bit more for the cervix to relax before you try to pass the inner catheter, and that should go pretty quickly given that time. And with this one, there's a whole lot not to, to like really, and that is it is a much faster AI once you've got the inner catheter in, and there's far less leakage. So a good system. Wean service interval, as we've already talked about a couple times, is a huge driver for fertility. Your data probably looks very similar to this. The majority of your sows are very likely expressing estrus on days 4 or 5. You're looking at 9 different farms here and when they show estrus around that time. And then from the SMS data set, they've also looked at fertility, fairing rate times 10 in blue, and total born in red, and then an index of those two. And I think you can see the index is basically showing us that the highest fertility for pig production is really based on these days 3, 4, 5, and 6. And there really aren't very many on days 2, so that one can probably be excluded. The animals that come back on day 3, however, are more likely to be the ones that are receiving 3 services. They have a longer estrus, and those animals that are returning on day 6 are the ones that are more likely to receive just a single service because they have shorter estrus. So if you're looking for where fertility lies, you might want to look at your own data and plot out how are those animals doing from a fertility standpoint. I am concerned about days 1 and 2. I think you would be too, which is if you believe what I told you, that follicle development takes about 4 to 5 days, then a day 1 to 2 does not make any sense. Something's going wrong there, and it's important to find out what is going on because their fertility is probably not very good. So yeah, it was something that could be looked at. If you're looking to source problems, maybe the issue is, obviously for wean sows, it would be in lactation. I know we have experts talking about feed sows, so I won't go over that. But I will say days off feed in lactation is important, and the data is there to show 2 days, consecutive days off feed or even reduced feed is problematic. Interrupted nursing, if the litter is ill or if the sow is ill, that can stop nursing, and as soon as you stop the nursing stimulus, follicle development can start, and that can start somewhere after day 10 of lactation. So you can wind up having follicles start to move, and then if they start nursing again, then you get a suppression. And this causes some oddities, cystic ovaries, ovulation within the crates as well. And the other thing is to look at or consider is, since all these sows are not farrowing on the same day, anytime these rooms are weaned, you often have spread in lactation length. And the concerning ones would be the ones on the ends. The ones that are very early, day 16, 17, are more likely to show lower reproductive fertility, and those at the higher end might be the ones that are coming out of nursing suppression and might ovulate early. So for estrus detection, I'm going someplace with this, and that is estrus detection relies on 2 behaviors. Proceptive behavior, where the sow actually seeks out the boar. And these females actually do this even if they're in stalls. So in a free pen system where a boar is fixed in a crate, the sow can move, and electronically they can monitor frequencies of visits. And even in stalls, sows that are very interested in the boar move to the front of of the crate. And sows that are not interested head backwards and are not interested whatsoever. So they still display proceptive behavior. Receptive behavior is what we're looking for. If they come near a boar and they lock up, nobody's applied any back pressure. There's been no, and we see that all the time, animals that are very sensitive, and you can look at them and tell. Other ones, you can just simply apply the back pressure test with no bore, and they'll stand as well. But the majority of us use bore exposure and back pressure tests. And these types of behaviors are going to be used for the new monitoring systems that are coming. And that was some form of electronic estrus detection. It could be sensor related, it might be camera related, where they're putting data into a computer. But boars might be fixed in the pens, moved close once a day, or not used at all. And in some of these systems, they're going to measure changes in either duration or frequency of visits to the boar, movement, pedometers over either an hour or day. It's not clear how much data is going to be used to make that decision, or even standing and lying ratios when they're in stalls. How long are they doing it? How much data is collected? So accuracy really relies on 100% true and 100% false. And I guess I would challenge this room. How do we know 100% true and false? Really, you have to look at the ovaries to find out what they should be doing rather than what they actually are doing. So where are things going in the future? I don't know, but I believe electronics and robotics are coming, especially in an industry that's challenged with labor availability. We have used robots in our industry for decades now, and they're very effective for moving, allowing, instead of using 1 or 2 or 3 people to check heat, now you can have one person doing it all themselves. But the thing is, the boars that we use, as you probably know, they're not all the same. Many of them are not vocal, right? We all know sight, sound, smell, and touch for the boar is important, but how many boars are not vocal? Most. And how many what is the difference in the pheromones that they're eliminating? Really not sure. But since boars are not all the same, even with a boar, when you start heat checking, if you're going down a row, the boar actually might get excited and salivate and urinate, but that's really only for the first 3 sows, right? And when he goes down the row and maybe you're at sow 100, it's just not interested anymore. So with that in mind, when we agree all of these stimuli from the boar are important, there possibly is an opportunity to add stimuli in to help these boars that are not there. Perhaps adding in boar recordings. You can use these small JBL speakers, put them on your belt, or even tie them on the boar himself. And there's an opportunity for pheromones as well. A new one has come out probably within the last 5 years. And I think if you've tried these and you're not happy with them, I would agree. But I would also say what we've also kind of learned is it's how they're administered, when they're administered. I believe that the stimuli, the order of the stimuli, or when they're applied, affect the next stimuli that is applied. So if you apply a pheromone first and then try to go do back pressure, you might not get the same standing response to both. So I think there's going to need to be some work in this area in the future. Some of you, of course, we've all been interested in single fixed time insemination. The industry in the U.S. got really excited about it when it first came around, but it probably left just as quickly because it didn't really kind of meet expectations. And around the world, Brazil and China are extremely interested in this, and so they are picking up on it, and they're looking for ways to make that work. But I'll pull maybe a question. Will this come around? I say maybe if we get a diagnostic tool that can tell us who not to try to induce and breed. Females that do not develop follicles will not ovulate and are not fertile. But without any way to tell that, these systems require everybody to be fertile. So diagnostics could be a game changer in this as well. But I'll show you a couple things, which is what's important when you're actually doing this technology. Well, it's going to be the number of sperm. You can see 1.5 billion here, 2.5 billion, and when they give the single fixed time. And I'll point out that doubling the amount of sperm here increased fairing rates, and changing the AI time from 30 hours after to 22 or 26 was very important, at least in fairing rate, really minimal significant effects in litter size. But how we administer these treatments on commercial farms will be really important to how successful they are. I'd also say that kind of what we've learned is parity one sows are a problem, in that they're more than likely not to develop follicles very quickly after weaning. And in addition, even in control females, those that express estrus and are bred have a lower fairing rate. And same thing with fixed time single insemination. These animals just may not be good candidates for this technology right now until we get a better diagnostic tool. But I would say I'll leave you with something positive, and that is a study that we did. I'll say a lot of people and a lot of effort was put on this, but we gave a dose 600 million, so obviously really low. After I just told you 1.5 billion didn't do as well. But now I'm showing you in another study 600 million sperm, single AI, and we wound up with a pregnancy rate of almost 81%, and healthy embryos at day 30 at almost 15.5. And I would not have predicted that would have happened in a commercial farm. But it does simply show us what is possible. I don't know how we get this in a commercial setting, but I think this does tell us that the technology could work. So moving to lower numbers of sperm for genetic advantage or to sexed sperm might be an opportunity. Some of you may wonder, because capturing opportunities in the future, you might be wondering, well, frozen sperm, is it ever going to be practical? Well, it's been around for, 50 years, and it's still really limited in its use. But I would argue that it's probably more important now than ever, especially with global diseases that are out there. But why is it not going to be used? It's because we kill so many sperm in this cryopreservation process, and we damage a lot more. And the sow fertility is lower when you use it. It costs a lot more to produce, and it takes longer. And we don't have a practical system for using it at the farm. So some of these are hurdles, but not all of them are probably insurmountable. But what is the biggest problem with frozen sperm fertility? It's how many sperm are damaged when we thaw them. And what you're looking at is either total motility or progressive motility. And I pulled out the best of the bunch because some of these are actually very, very close to liquid semen that has not been frozen. So just several different antioxidants. There's boar selection, who's a good freezer, who's not. But a lot of things go into this. But if you can get many sperm to survive and still get high motility, you have the best chance for getting a good fertility. And again, I cherry-picked the data, asked people that were using frozen semen, and they sent me their records. And if you look at the fairing rates, some of them are in the 90s, a lot of 80s in there. It can be done. It can be successful. One of the things that will be hard to overcome is the total born. I think you'll still see it's lower. When you have lower numbers of sperm, you're more than likely, lower numbers of fertile sperm, you're more likely to get smaller litter size, even if you get your AI timing correct. You've already heard me say a couple times, fertility diagnostics, I think, is a huge hurdle for us, and that we need to make an advancement in here as well. And so the technology that we use, ultrasound, has been a great success in the industry for pregnancy diagnosis. Not so much for ovary. It's not easy to do. But there's other things coming on, vaginal pH sensors, cell populations that would give somebody an indication of what is the current status without taking too much time to do it. Vaginal impedance, whether it's single or multi-frequency. Camera behaviors, trying to associate behaviors with fertility status. And then you've seen thermography. A lot of thermography pictures are being used to evaluate whether there's temperature related to fertility as well. If stressors, which we're all concerned about, whether it's heat stress, disease stress, grouping stress, if it affects anything in here, there's several different steps that could affect reproduction, from ovulation rate, follicular development, estrus expression, progesterone production, embryo development, pregnancy establishment, and then even fetal development. So anywhere in this spectrum, an insult potentially could impact reproduction that we would see downstream as a zero fairing rate or low litter size. But I only pull up one example here, and that was looking at days of grouping. And the question was, does day of grouping actually matter for fertility? And I would say, even though I'm going to show you that, yes, one day does, other studies have shown that they do just fine with that. So it's more complicated. It's a combination of probably system design and management, and maybe even sow prior experience. But nevertheless, some farms are reporting failed reproduction and others are reporting success with it. But either way you look at it, in the failure groups, it's not an absolute failure. Even with seasonal fertility, there is a subpopulation of females that are sensitive to heat stress, to grouping stress. It's not all of them. And so another opportunity, I think, is to find that subpopulation rather than saying the whole group is sensitive. But in that subpopulation, at least from a grouping standpoint, I believe we have fear, fighting, injury, limits to rest. Those sows that can't get any rest or get away are fatigued. They can't find space to rest, and they may not be able to find feed when they want to. So all really combination of factors that's really bad for some of these animals. But when we look at fairing rate, and I'll just focus on fairing rate, compared to a stall in the study was almost 93% fairing rate. No difference with mixing after 5 weeks. So perfect late mixing. But I will say, even in the late mixed group, there was fighting, there was injuries, which of course you don't have in the stall. That makes sense. But cortisol was higher, injuries and fighting. But nevertheless, all of those went away. So it was still a very good treatment. Where we did wind up with problem was our early mixing in the first week. Those animals fought a lot. Their conception rate was considerably lower, and they did wind up with injuries and stuff like that. So we came to the conclusion that that was not a good day for mixing, at least on these particular farms. What's happening in litter size? I mean, we've all been fascinated by this, the trend in increasing litter size. Is it going to stop? I don't know. We're looking at early, over the last 20 years, a continual increase. Over in Europe, the lines keep going. So they're even ahead of us in numbers. But the data is pretty clear, is as litter size continues to increase, litter size continues to increase, average litter birth weight continues to go down. And so that's going to be a continual trend. So in these hyperprolific sows, the terminology being used for them, they're born alive exceeds their number of functional teats. So have to manage these females a little bit differently. In Europe, they're now talking about super prolific sows that have born alive of 18 to 20, and obviously far exceed the number of functional teats. Still enhanced measurement of what has to happen. So what they do know is that the hyperprolific sows and even the super prolific sows have longer durations of farrowing. So you probably know where I'm going with this. As litter size increases, farrowing duration continues to increase with a really high correlation rate here. The longer duration of farrowing is associated with more stillborns and weaker pigs at birth. What this is really happening is the sow gets fatigued. The uterus gets fatigued. It's a tough process. And most of those stillborns occur in the last third of the litter. So fewer and weaker contractions in the last third can wind up, even with pigs that are born alive, wind up with pigs that are weak and stressed out and may not be able to find the teat. And 93% of all stillborns are due to premature umbilical rupture and the failure of the sow to be able to push that piglet out through the birth canal. And the half-life of oxygen is 5 minutes, so when something's not occurring, those animals are not going to make it at all. There is some data coming out about time of feeding. If you increase the frequency of feeding relative to when they're going to farrow. Nobody knows when they're going to farrow, but if you go to a more frequent feeding interval, oftentimes maybe the last one is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but if that can get moved up so that it's within 6 hours, glucose levels rise in that sow, and that would give the potential for more energy for that sow to avoid farrowing fatigue, especially with the long farrowings. Dr. Greiner mentioned some interesting things going on, especially in Europe. We were told that if you want to see what's going to happen to the U.S. swine industry, look at Europe in the future. Look at Europe for either 5 or 10 years, and they're dealing with legislation about the farrowing crate. And that is to improve animal welfare, the ability for the sow to turn around, express all of her normal behaviors, and interact with her litter. But one of the approved tools is the temporary crate. So that can be a conventional farrowing crate that can be used for just a few days before farrowing and a few days after farrowing. And then you either have to swing the gates out or just simply expand the sides. So this is actually a really good method because it allows pig growth. All measures are normal and does not increase piglet loss, no increased crushing loss. For free farrowing pens, am I at 5 minutes, Colin?
You're right in there, allow time for some questions.
Okay. For free farrowing pens, no closed farrowing pen is allowed. But the problem with these are that they wind up, in almost all cases, they wind up with more more pigs that are lost from crushed. But there's no difference in farrowing reduction or stillborns. Is that my phone? It was me, sorry about that. I kept wondering, is that the timer going on? Sorry. So I won't go into litter size colostrum because I don't have much time, right, Colin? 5 minutes I have?
You got 5. We got 10 total, so
okay.
We're going to have some questions.
Okay. So I thought this is an interesting story. With the hyperprolific sow, some really interesting data, and maybe some of our speakers will talk about this later today. But as litter size has increased, colostrum has not shown the same increase. So that means for these larger litters, average colostrum intake is actually going down per pig. And so pigs actually require a minimum. They've got a number of grams on that, and I believe it's 200 or 250 grams that a piglet has to consume. And this is important in the first 24 hours because it gives them energy to nurse, thermoregulate, and they also get their immunity from there. But what I found really interesting was that the immune components peak 6 hours after the first pig and are nearly at baseline by 24 hours. And that means the last pigs born in the litter are at a huge disadvantage to not only finding an available teat, but for getting the required amount of colostrum. So obviously this would be an opportunity for intervention. And I think that's kind of what the focus has been, is if you can dry, warm those pigs, help them find an available teat, or even do split suckling in the first 24 hours, you can manage these large litters and improve survival. I won't go into the nurse sow systems, but they're really interesting. The one sow system, I actually like the two sow system, where you're putting the extra newborn pigs on a day 7 sow, whose milk is better in volume and content relative to a really newborn pig. And one of the things that we've found as well is in parity 1 sows that are nursing a large litter, we tested 15 to 16 pigs nursing versus 12 with matched functional teats. So either the 12 group probably had 14 functional, but the 15, 16 group had 16 functional teats. And what we found was the 15, 16 group weaned more pigs, but they also lost more pigs. And they lost more pigs early on to crushing, fallback pigs. And so I think this is an opportunity, at least for management, if you have these large litters that are nursing. I think this is another place that could, if you're watching them, you can actually help them very early on and pull them out if they're at risk. I'm going to finish with a couple slides on environment. I've been interested in about barn lighting for a long time. Effects of barn lighting intensity at pig level are elusive, really elusive around the world. And so I'm not really here to tell you I know exactly what it is, but I will say that even in our own study, less than 50 lux, which is pretty dark, at pig level is not desirable for a lot of different reasons. But I also think this one associated with lower fairing rate, at least in our studies. I don't know the mechanism, but I will say that if you're thinking about lighting duration, it should be greater than 8 hours. And I'm thinking more along the lines of 10 to 12. But from an energy use standpoint, there's probably no advantage to going greater than 12. So save some money and move on. And there is lots of variation within and between barns. So if you look at study here, in same season of the year, breeding lux, 30 lux at pig level. In gestation lighting in another place, 152. So you can look at that all over the place. There's just a lot of variation in this system. And I'm finishing up with, probably appropriately, I pulled out my hot weather ones, and I decided let's talk about cold weather, because we don't talk about it much. But I say sows and pens and stalls in certain locations are susceptible to chilling. And if you walk the barn and check on a really cold day, you'll find those cold spots. You won't do it in warm weather or other, but you'll find them when you're there and you can feel those cold drafts, especially near the outside walls, inlets, hallways. And I'll show you this in walk through farms that we've evaluated multiple spaces and times. I picked up when the weather's outside at 40 degrees, not terrible at all, 5-degree difference in indoor temperature, 59 to 78, 19 degree in different locations within the building, and 12 degrees. That's way too big of a spread. And if you're wondering, does it make any difference to the females? I'm going to say, yes, it does. Cold stress actually changes pig behavior. These animals that are chilled, they limit floor contact. They don't want to stand, or they stand more. They do not want to be on the cold concrete. If they could, they would try to lay on another animal, but in stalls, that's really limited. And so they wind up utilizing their limited feed, their unrestricted feed, they utilize that for thermoregulation. Percent of time standing in a cold environment, 43 versus 20. Body temperature lower almost a degree. Feed intake fixed at 2.7. Body weight gain during a 4-week period of time, 16 kilograms versus 22. They're using their feed resources not for production and not for replacing weight that parity 1s or parity 2s or any sows that lost during lactation. They're using that feed to thermoregulate as well. And their cortisol level is higher as well. So I'll end by saying what's coming, I don't know. But I'll say I believe housing changes are coming to us. Obviously, California and other places are showing that as well. I think electronic is coming. Engineers are working on this, so that's exciting. Artificial age, probably an opportunity. We need diagnostics. We're working on some of that too. I know lots of other places are. Litter size increase is a big question mark for me. I know it's going that direction. Europe is already ahead of us. But I wonder, how do we stop this trend? Do we keep going? Nobody's talking about putting on the brakes yet. And that's going to be a tough one. And lower sperm per litter, from a genetic advantage, I think it's the way for us to go. And then I think really there's going to be, because of I don't think lower costs are I think they're here to stay, and therefore we have to focus not only on the resources we're using, but making sure those resources are used in the right place for production. And with that, I really want to thank you for your attention and for the organizers for the program.
We have time for questions. Any quick questions? I know Dr. Knox will be with us for the day, so feel free to grab him. Are you?
I am,
Yep,
yes.
I figured so. Yeah, right here in the middle.
It sounds like a lot of the overall success is tied to follicle development. Is there a way that that can be predicted in your, the replacement dose?
Yeah, okay. The question was, follicle development is apparently a big driver. Is there any way to predict who is going to develop follicles in the replacement gilt? The best evidence is not prediction, but there are associated factors. Positive body weight gain. I'm trying to think. Limited days off feed in the growth trajectory. About that, I don't think we've got a really great indicator except looking at anecdotal or associated measures.
Any others, real quick? I've got one. You had a study there that it was actually Brad Belstra's study, correct? And
Yep.
you used a 600 million sperm,
Yep.
right? Was that conventional or PCAI?
That was-
And that was an Ovugel study, most likely?
That was PCAI.
PC, too.
Yep. That was on a depopulation study. And so, yeah, we went down even much lower sperm numbers. So, yeah. The company was interested in how low they could go for sex sperm use.
Very good. All right, thank you, Dr. Knox.
Thank you.